Yeah. So good evening, everyone, and I would thank everyone for joining in this busy time on a Monday evening. So with this, I take hardly 15-20 minutes to just complete the presentation, and we hardly discuss about GBM in practice. It's all about lung, kidney, where immunotherapy is there, and today we will discuss on the role of bevacizumab in glioblastoma. So, so this is how we would go into starting from introduction to grading to prevalence and then chemotherapy and what is the efficacy of bevacizumab and then what are the references and then algorithm. So we all know that even though brain has a lot of neurons in it, a lot of supporting cells are required, including the astrocytes, oligodendrocytes, and microglia. So, glioblastoma is basically a high-grade neoplasm of the astrocytes. It is an aggressive type of cancer, which can occur either in brain or spinal cord, and it arises from astrocytes, which are the support cells to the neurons. It can happen in any age, but it tends to happen in elderly population, in older age adults, and then it causes all sorts of CNS symptoms like headache, nausea, vomiting, and seizures. And glioblastoma is also known as glioblastoma multiforme. It's a WHO grade 4, and this is a very difficult disease to treat. And we say that the median survival is less than a year in this difficult disease to treat, even in spite of so much of progress and research being done in this particular field. So it's a very difficult disease to treat, and cure is not a possibility. So the intent of treatment is palliation and to prolong life and to give good quality of life for the patient. So this is the WHO grading and classification of gliomas. Basically, they constitute nearly 60% of brain tumors. And among all gliomas, glioblastoma is the highest grade, that is WHO grade 4, and is the most aggressive tumor which we have. You can see the pilocytic astrocytoma mainly happens in pediatric population, and it is has the best prognosis. And then we have the grade 2 or the diffuse astrocytoma, and then we have the grade 3 or the anaplastic astrocytoma, and then we have the grade 4 or the glioblastoma multiforme, which we are speaking of today. So what about the prevalence and incidence? You can see the NCI estimates of nearly 22,000 adults they were diagnosed with brain and other CNS tumors in 2015, and you can see a very high percentage of deaths of nearly 15,000 odd deaths, and you can see the incidence is 2 to 3 per 100,000 adults per year and accounts to nearly 52% of all brain tumors. Overall, GBM accounts for about 17% of all tumors of the brain. These tumors tend to occur in adults between 45 to 70 years of age. Between 2005 to 9, the median age for death from cancer of brain and other areas of central nervous system was 64 years. So this is the age group in which GBM happens, is around 45 to 70 years, and both primary and metastatic happens in 17%. So going further, so this is what we have the treatment. So so the sequence of treatment for a GBM is mainly a GTR, that is resect as much as it is possible, and then we give an adjuvant temozolomide radiation, and then we consolidate with adjuvant temozolomide for up to 6 months. And if it is MGMT methylated, and if there is some residual disease, we give even up to 1 year of temozolomide. This is the evidence that we have. So, and then if you come to the recurrent GBM, so GBM is bound to recur in spite of the best surgery, best adjuvant chemoradio and adjuvant chemotherapy. In spite of that, almost all GBMs do recur. And these are the difficult to treat population, and the challenges that we face regarding the best systemic therapy for a recurrent GBM is we have a spaced number of trials, and we have majority of them are older trials in TMZ, temozolomide naive patients, and the endpoints and the response criteria used were different, and to assess the true response, because we also come across what is known as pseudo progression, necrosis, reduction in contrast enhancement. There's so many intricacies and difficulties to assess the response to systemic therapy as far as GBM is concerned, and there are varied treatment options. So these are the systemic therapy options that are approved in a GBM, starting from nitrosoureas to BCNU or CCNU, and then we have temozolomide, and then we have bevacizumab, either alone or in combination with chemotherapy, and we have immunotherapy coming up with some modest benefit. Then so then coming on to bevacizumab. So as we all know, bevacizumab is a anti-VEGF. It doesn't act on the receptor. However, it binds to these vascular endothelial growth factors. Once it binds to VEGF, it it inhibits the growth of new blood vessels. It inhibits growth of endothelial cells and inhibits angiogenesis. And it works in majority of solid tumors by inhibiting angiogenesis, growth, and metastasis. So this is the mechanism of action where it binds to the VEGF, the vascular endothelial growth factor, extracellularly, whereas drugs like ramucirumab or aflibercept, they bind to the receptor, and then we have a lot of VEGFR pathways like sorafenib, lenvatinib. They act mainly in the post-receptor level. So bevacizumab binds in the extracellular level to the VEGF growth factor, and then we have ramucirumab binding to the receptor, and then we have these VEGF TKIs like sorafenib, lenvatinib. They basically have action in the post-receptor level. So this is the mode of action. It binds to the VEGF, thereby lowering the binding of VEGF to its receptors. As a result, there is reduced activation of angiogenesis pathway and blood vessel formation in the tumors. So, as we know, bevacizumab is approved in a lot of in a variety of malignancies, including colorectal cancer, non-small cell lung cancer, glioblastoma multiforme, and then renal cell cancer, cervical cancer, ovarian cancer. So bevacizumab is not approved for use in patients under the age of 18 years. This is one we need to note, because all the clinical trials of bevacizumab have included adult population over 18 years of age. And then these are the warning symptoms for bevacizumab. We have GI perforation, because it results in poor healing. No new blood vessel formation is a problem, so perforation is common. And then post-op, we avoid bevacizumab, or pre-op, we avoid, because of poor wound healing and wound dehiscence is a problem with bevacizumab. And of course, hemorrhage is a problem, either GI bleed or a CNS bleed, again because the frail blood vessels are not allowed to grow properly, and therefore the blood vessels become more leaky, and therefore hemorrhage is a complication of bevacizumab. So the most common adverse reactions observed in bevacizumab are at a rate of more than 10%, at least twice the control arm, and these are mainly epistaxis, headache, hypotension, rhinitis, proteinuria, taste alteration, dry skin, rectal hemorrhage, lacrimation disorder, back pain, and exfoliated dermatitis. So even before I read the presentation, I wasn't aware of lacrimation disorder, dry skin, taste alteration. So these are quite different side effects than we usually think of with bevacizumab. So, and one more thing is these side effects like hypertension, proteinuria. These basically are surrogates of its efficacy. So, if we have a patient who has the side effects, probably it's a surrogate that this drug is probably working well in this particular patient. So, these are side effects and also surrogates of better activity and better efficacy. So this is the dose of bevacizumab. Roughly, to understand, per week we need 5 milligram per kg. If you are giving 2 weekly, it becomes 10 milligram per kg. If you are giving 3 weekly, it becomes 15 milligram per kg. So accordingly, we have approval for different doses in different cancers. If you take 3 weekly regimen in NSCLC, it is 15 per kg. And in GBM, we give 2 weekly, it is 10 per kg. And then RCC, we give with interferon every 2 weeks, again it becomes 10 milligram per kg. And in cervix, it is 3 milligram per kg. So whenever it is 2 weekly, it is 10 milligram per kg, and 3 weekly is 15 milligrams per kg. So again, this similar thing in ovarian cancer, there have been trials where they have used 10 per kg and 15 per kg, both in platinum sensitive and also in the resistant setting. So this is what we have the trial data on nitrosourea monotherapy or in combination in GBM. So we know we use CCNU and BCNU. We know they cross the blood-brain barrier, but the problem is they are too marrow-toxic, they are stem cell toxic, and we use these drugs for autologous stem cell transplant as a myeloablative regimen, where we use BCNU or CCNU and cause a lot of hematological toxicity, and interstitial lung disease are the problems with BCNU and CCNU. However, these drugs have reasonably good activity, especially lomustine has a good activity. It's an oral tablet which we take as a single dose. So you can see the dose around 100 to 130 milligram per meter square once in 6 weeks. So it is once in 6 weeks because it causes such prolonged myelosuppression that the blood counts take a long time to recover. And then we have a combination of CCNE lomustine with temozolomide. Again, causes prolonged and frequent hematologic toxicity. And then we have the combination of CCNE with bevacizumab. And you can see the trials. We have the BELLOP phase 2 trial with the PFS and OS are there. And if you can combine, it has shown improved progression-free and also overall survival. But in the EORTC trial, it did show an improved PFS, but not OS. So I'll just show in the further slides. So this is bevacizumab or lomustine plus bevacizumab, where you can see an improvement in progression-free. So you can see the combination of bevacizumab and lomustine met the pre-specified criteria and should be evaluated further in patients with GBM. So they did show, but problem is toxicity with this drug. And lomustine, the primary endpoint was overall survival. And you can see here that bevacizumab plus lomustine versus lomustine alone, the overall survival was not different, but there was a statistically significant progression-free survival when you combine lomustine to bevacizumab when compared to lomustine alone. So in GBM, we have data where there has been a comparison of lomustine alone versus lomustine plus bevacizumab. So in comparison, there is only a progression-free survival benefit with a good hazard ratio of 0.49, but the overall survival is not statistically significant. So among the active drugs which we have, so we have evidence for monotherapy with bevacizumab, evidence for bevacizumab with lomustine, and we will see further in combination with irinotecan also we have. So whenever you combine bevacizumab with any chemotherapy arm, basically it adds more into progression-free survival than into overall survival. So these are the hallmark adverse events that we see, including thromboembolism, hematologic toxicities, bleed, and all those. So these are the conclusions of the URDC trial. Adding bevacizumab to lomustine did not confer a survival advantage over lomustine alone, but prolonged progression-free survival. There were no unexpected findings from assessments of toxic effects. So addition of bevacizumab in the current trial did not result in reduction of glucocorticoids, and MGMT did not predict increased benefit with therapy. And this is the trial that led to approval of bevacizumab in recurrent GBM. So we have data for temozolomide where temozolomide works in MGMT methylated patients, but bevacizumab has no selectivity or has no preference for MGMT methylation status. And we always call bevacizumab has a steroid sparing effect, but in this particular trial, it did not result in reduction of glucocorticoid use, and its combination with lomustine did not improve overall survival, but it improved only progression-free survival. However, the drug was approved based on these data. So then we have bevacizumab alone or in combination with irinotecan. So we usually use this regimen because it is less toxic, and irinotecan can be a safe drug to handle. So you can see the difference when we give only bevacizumab versus bevacizumab plus irinotecan. You can see the PFS. If you give only bevacizumab, it is 4.2 months PFS. When you combine with irinotecan, it is 5.6 months PFS. There is a numerical increase in PFS when you put irinotecan, whereas if you look into the overall survival is not different. So PFS is 4.2, 5.6, 9.2, and 8.7. So the overall survival again is not different if you use chemotherapy with bevacizumab. Only the progression-free survival is significant. So bevacizumab alone or in combination with irinotecan was well tolerated and active in recurrent glioblastoma. Single-agent bevacizumab demonstrated an objective response for a clinical meaningful duration. So bevacizumab was active, and combining irinotecan with bevacizumab improved only progression-free survival but not overall survival. So this is a brain study of the survival data comparing bevacizumab versus bevacizumab plus irinotecan in recurrent GBM. It was a phase 2 study involving 167 patients with recurrent GBM, previously treated with temozolomide and radiotherapy. Patients were randomized to receive either bevacizumab alone 10 mg per kg 2 weekly or bevacizumab plus irinotecan for up to 104 weeks. And you can see the overall response rates was higher in the BEV irinotecan arm. The 6 months PFS was also better. The 12-month survival was comparable. 18-month survival was superior numerically in the bevacizumab arm. And again, so what again we can note here is if you can combine bevacizumab with irinotecan, you can improve the response rates and the progression-free survival, whereas overall survival does not change. So temozolomide plus bevacizumab is less promising than combination with CCNU. Other combinations, irinotecan, carboplatin, etoposide, erlotinib, sorafenib, vorinostat, etc. So no efficacy signal beyond single agent BEV. So and also there has been a Cabaret trial, it's a phase 2 trial where maintenance bevacizumab was not beneficial. So again, to have a final concluding remarks, GBM is a difficult disease to treat. We have very few active agents on GBM in the present day. Of course, surgery is the best way to debulk it, and we consolidate it with temozolomide RT and temozolomide chemotherapy adjuvant. But having said that, all the patients are going to relapse. And once a recurrent GBM is there, we have limited options. The options of re-RT, re-surgery, but not possible in majority of patients. On those occasions, we have systemic therapy. When we come to systemic therapy, we have BCNU, we have CCNU, which are the nitrosoureas. They have good CNS penetration. They have shown good responses, but the problem is hematologic toxicity. They're marrow-toxic, stem cell toxic. Therefore, they're given once in 6 weeks. Even after 6 weeks, the counts do not recover, and they're difficult drugs to handle, basically. And then we have other drugs, other chemotherapy drugs, again, like irinotecan. Either they can use alone or in combination with bevacizumab. So bevacizumab is a class targeted therapy that works, that has shown good responses in glioblastoma multiforme. So there has been trials of bevacizumab monotherapy showing reasonably good response rates, progression-free survival. And when you combine bevacizumab with chemotherapy, either with lomustine, or you combine it with irinotecan, or you combine it with temozolomide, so you can only improve the progression-free survival, but not the overall survival. And the activity of bevacizumab is independent of the MGMT methylation status, or even whether you have used prior temozolomide or not, it doesn't matter. So this drug works, it adds progression-free survival, but the overall survival is not greatly changed. Also, it does not reduce the steroid requirement as per a trial. And maintenance bevacizumab is not beneficial. So, and then going further, so again, we know that when a patient has nothing left, so bevacizumab as a last treatment, it's a last-ditch effort to give some duration to a patient who is otherwise terminal. So in conclusion, the objective response rate and the PFS, OS times, and rates indicate that bevacizumab has activity in patients with GBM following the failure of radiation, temozolomide, and lomustine. And then this is the treatment algorithm for a GBM. So we diagnose recurrence, and once the recurrence is there, we always explore for a repeat surgery if possible. And then we look into whether it is MGMT methylated or not. If it is methylated, then temozolomide, nitrosoureas are an option. And if it is unmethylated, then bevacizumab single agent or in combination with chemo is an option. And of course, best supportive care is always an option in these patients. So in conclusion, nitrosoureas still represent the most widely accepted standard option for systemic therapy at recurrence. There is clinical activity of bevacizumab as monotherapy at recurrence, but an effect on overall survival is uncertain. The objective response rate and the progression-free survival and OS times indicate that bevacizumab has activity in patients with GBM following radiation, temozolomide, and lomustine. Prospective data from phase 2 trials pointed towards efficacy of a combination regimen with nitrosourea, which was not confirmed in the phase 3 trial. So the take-home message is bevacizumab is an anti-VEGF, has activity in GBM, but it has been successful in prolonging the progression-free survival, but has not added any overall survival in GBM patients. So with this, I would conclude, and I would thank Fresenius to provide me the opportunity to speak, and I would thank all the participants for their patient listening. Thank you.